had 24 people weighing in on our poll this morning. All
recording
said
in progress.
Every single person said it warrants an investigation and, of course, a statement by the Prime Minister. And we have no lesser person as our guest than a former Minister of Agriculture himself, who must be aware of this, what Clarence Rambert is talking.
Good morning to you, Mr. Vasant Bharath. How are you?
I'm very well, gentlemen. How are you guys?
Long time. Long time, that's right.
Out of sight, out of mind, eh?
Right. No.
You're clearly in our minds because we called you.
As a matter of fact, last week, one of our most ardent callers, a guy who goes by the name of Mr. Pinal, I think he named you as one of the leaders of the UNC, you, Dr. Munilal, and I think he said Ramona Ramdial. Were the three possible.
I am nowhere close to the leadership of the UNC, so I'm not sure where he's gotten that information from.
Well, clearly he feels that you should be.
I think he was suggesting a potential leader in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the discussion was about that. Yeah,
I'm humbled, but not in the current dispensation and current makeup of the organization.
Well, naturally, you have to go in there as leader and change it.
Well, that's a discussion hopefully for another time.
All right.
Well, if you could chime in on a question this morning, I don't know if you've had sight or sound of Mr. Rambarath's startling revelations about land issues. You were Minister of Agriculture at one point, and land deeds, tenure, corruption has always been a conversation in Trinidad and Tobago. What thinks you about these revelations?
Well, I can't say that they're startling revelations simply because there's been whispers about this kind of activity taking place for quite some time. Mr. Rambarath obviously has confronted the matter and taken a lot of these issues to court. And I agree with all of your callers this morning in your poll that the matter needs to be thoroughly investigated. I can't say that much of this was brought to my attention when I was minister, and I'm not sure if it's simply that the issue has escalated considerably, or it was just never brought to my attention. But I would be naive if I were to tell you that this has not been going on, or certainly that none of this has been going on for a long time. And the reality is that our systems of governance across the board, not just in agriculture, is completely broken, and there's no accountability. There is no one takes responsibility for assets of the government, and it has become almost a free-for-all in almost every aspect of our lives, to the detriment of the citizens in the country as a whole. And I'm happy that Mr. Rambarath has brought it to the attention of the authorities, and let's hope that the work that's required to bring those, or to at least investigate this thoroughly, is done expeditiously and is not swept under the carpet because the political directorate believes that it may reflect badly on them.
What kinds of issues would have come to your attention? In addition to, of course, the land deed issue, which you tried to solve at some level.
Yeah, I think what creates the problem, Paul, is the lethargy in the system and the lack of transparency in the system. So it's almost like, I'll give you an analogy. Town and country, which is a separate issue. Town and country is so lethargic in issuing proper permits for people to build that people just go ahead and build without planning permission. Or you have a situation where, unfortunately, town and country officers, it is alleged, look for bribes to be able to process permits. And that is happening throughout our government service. And I don't think it's any different in the agricultural sector, where because of the lethargy involved in dealing with leases, some of those leases, as you all know, have been outstanding. They've expired 20, 30 years ago, which does not allow the incumbent holder of the land to be able to make the necessary applications for the incentives, for example. So what's the easiest way to do? And because the system is so lethargic, it opens up opportunities for public officers to take bribes, unfortunately, to be able to satisfy or satiate the need of the person who requires the land or requires the lease. And it's unfortunate, and that's what it is. And until, the IMF has recently concluded the Schedule 4 consultations. And every single time the IMF is here, or any other of the world institutions are here, they talk about reform of the public service. And until we engage in that seriously, we are going to continue to have these problems, if not in agriculture, you'll have it in planning, you will have it in healthcare, you will have it all over the place, because there are no proper checks and balances. And most importantly, and this is something I continue to say, and I've said in your program, leaders do not take responsibility. What they do is pass the blame on from one to the other. And that is an unfortunate aspect of life in Trinidad and Tobago. So until we take responsibility for our own ministries as leaders, as ministers and as prime ministers, this kind of thing will continue to happen.
But Minister, I hear you, but the public service, public service reform is a conversation that has been talked about for approximately decades, at least over 10, 15, 20 years. It's something that has always been part of the narrative that you hear every now and then surfacing, and every now and then somebody's appointed to look at it. And you talk about checks and balances. I'm not so sure that checks and balances don't exist, I think checks and balances exist, but they are run roughshod over, sometimes by ministers who don't follow the actual process that ensures good governance, ensures those checks and balances, and their corresponding narrative is that the public service is keeping us back. The public service are being, unnecessarily obstructionist, when in fact it's about doing the right thing. So there's a kind of balance between the two narratives. One of it is that there requires more efficiency and there requires more innovation in terms of the public sector, which they are restricted by a lot of bureaucratic things in place that leads into those checks and balances. But the other part of it is that ministers or people who are elected to office need to understand that those checks and balances exist for a reason. And because you can't get your own way all of the time does not mean it's on account of the inefficiency of the public service alone.
No, and I agree with that. Having been involved in several ministries myself, there are checks and balances, but unfortunately what has happened is that over time, they have been eroded or even watered down to the point where they've become ineffective. And the current processes you talked about, whereby ministers bypass those checks and balances, or even overwrite them or overrule them, has become the norm. So the checks and balances, in many instances, no longer is the norm in terms of our behavior. That's really the problem.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bharath. When you were Minister of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, I think, or Marine Affairs, I think it was.
Land and Marine Affairs.
Right. You were not the responsibility for state land didn't fall under your ministry. I think it fell under housing and the environment. Am I correct?
No. It fell under my portfolio. The portfolio was food production, land and marine affairs. Mm-hmm. So it had to do with fisheries as well as land, as well as agriculture, fell under my portfolio. When I was moved to Ministry of Trade in 2012, the then Prime Minister split the ministry into two parts. Devan Maraj was responsible for agriculture, which was the food production side of it, and land and marine affairs was handed over to Jairam. That's where the split took place. But sorry, no.
Dr. Munilal.
Sorry, lands went to EMBD. Right. Which went to Munilal.
Which was on the housing, right?
Part of housing, yes.
Right.
So it was split in three. Yes, you're right. It was split into three at that point in time. So I'm not sure. I don't want to be naive and say to you guys that this hasn't been happening historically. Maybe it has escalated in the last few years, and Minister Rambarat became more aware of it. But I want to tell you that none of this was really ever brought to my attention with the intensity that clearly that Mr. Rambarat has.
You referenced checks and balances just now, Mr. Bharath, and even in Mr. Rambarat's disclosure, he spoke about the allegations of the complicity of a PS. And in my understanding of the structure of the public service, a PS is supposed to be one of the bastions of checks and balances against abuse or attempted abuse by ministers. How much have PSs dropped the ball?
Well, the PS, of course, as you know, is the accountable officer for the ministry. It is my belief that the quality of PSs over the years have been diluted. If you look back, look at the PS that I had in agriculture, and then she followed me to trade, Edwina Leacock. You very rarely find PSs of that quality anymore. And obviously, if you don't have people of quality, and the same if you don't have ministers of quality or MPs of quality, the results are going to be negative.
What is the quality you speak about? Technical training, experience, in addition to fortitude? Because in very many cases, I've heard stories of ministers threatening PSs. I can't fire, but I will move you. And that sort of pressure being put on PSs who are trying to protect the public interest.
Yeah, I'm talking about competence, and I'm talking about integrity of the PSs. And the ability to stand firm on being able to do what their jobs are. Now, a minister can't move a PS. A minister can request that a PS be moved, but he cannot move a PS. So therefore, a strong, competent PS will know that this is the situation and act accordingly. But you're right. There are times when ministers try to get their own way and ride roughshod over a PS. What I found in the ministries that I operated in, and as you know, I operated in a few of them, was that getting the PS and the ministry on board with the policies and engaging them was far more fruitful and far more beneficial to all concerned. And I think all of you will know that I had a very good working relationship with public servants, the very same public servants. I want to tell you this, and I'm telling tales out of school here, but Minister Rambarat, many years ago, I was at the launching of the biography of Freddie Ferreira at the OWTU Hall. Minister Rambarat pulled me aside and he said, I want to ask you something. And I said, what? He said, how were you able to accomplish so much in the Ministry of Agriculture with the same amount of money that I've gotten? And I said, well, the first thing you've got to start doing is stop abusing and cursing or denigrating your public servants. Because he had a habit, unfortunately, of continually talking about how lazy his public servants were. And in fact, they were the very same public servants, as you guys know, who worked with me, very many of them. But it was really how you engage them. And I'm not saying that all of them, I'm not saying all public servants give 100%, but the vast majority with the right leadership, they work very competently and very well.
I can begin to see Mr. Rambarat in the light of, how I should put it, denigrating public because of his speaking style and whatnot. So much so, if he was here, Richard probably would have had his mic off and disappeared. But you saying that this was something recent, this revelation?
What is that?
The issue with Mr. Rambarat pulling you aside. That was something.
No, I just mentioned it was when Freddie Ferreira had his launch. So it was been in the first term. So it would have been around about 2017. Mm-hmm.
It would be remiss of us to have you and not ask you what you think of Dr. Rowley's reshuffle, the reassignment of then Attorney General Faris El-Rari, the adding of a minister, moving of Kazim Hussein to agriculture and adding Nigel de Freitas, and the entry of Reginald Lamour, senior counsel, into the fray. The entire scenario, what it means in terms of Dr. Rowley's administration and what it means in terms of these ministries, in particular the Ministry of the Attorney General moving forward, and what it meant for Faris El-Rari.
Well, before I comment on the actual intent, for me, I have a difficulty, not with just this prime minister, but with any prime minister having the kind of powers which is almost emperor-like, where the country is unaware of the reasons why the Attorney General, which is the second most important post in government, where the Attorney General of a country is moved without any notice at all or any reason. I think I mean, and this is not the Prime Minister just doing this today. I know other Prime Ministers and other Prime Ministers have done it as well. I think the country needs an explanation or is owed an explanation. And maybe it's our fault as citizens, but we don't demand these things. An Attorney General one morning is just moved from one ministry to another. Is it because of incompetence? Is it because of his allegiance with the former Commissioner of Police? Is it because he's a threat or Dr. Rowley feels insecure? Nobody knows. The Prime Minister has made no statement. And according to our Constitution, he doesn't need to. But I think that is wrong. I think the citizens are due an explanation as to why a most senior member of the government is moved from that portfolio and put into a portfolio seemingly where, you know, it's one that not many people would have very high up on the totem pole in terms of government priority. So,
Mr. Bharath, did you just say that the former Attorney General had an allegiance to the former Commissioner of Police?
I'm saying there's a perception that he was close to the former Commissioner of Police in the sense that.
But you use the word allegiance, eh?
Pardon?
Yeah, I said you use the word allegiance.
Well, in the sense that they had a relationship, a social relationship. You will remember that the Attorney General, former Attorney General, went to Parliament and passed legislation to allow someone from outside of the police service to act as police commissioner. Now,
he didn't do that on his own. He had to do that with the
well, again, I don't know, Paul. I don't know. I would hope not. But if one were to read what the CPC said over the weekend, where matter has been brought for the CPC to be disciplined, the CPC is alleging that the Attorney General was asking him or instructing him to, and again, this is just what I've read, I don't know if it's certain, right? He's alleging that the Attorney General, former Attorney General, has been instructing him to bypass the time-honored procedure of only drafting legislation that comes directly from the cabinet as a policy decision, or in extreme circumstances from the Prime Minister himself. So who knows whether this piece of legislation that went to Parliament was done without cabinet? I don't know. Maybe that is what's stuck in Dr. Rowley's craw. I don't know. I can't say, but it wouldn't be
That's an interesting perspective.
Well, I'm just hypothesizing, of course, because I don't. And you know, let me say that I have a lot of respect for Faris Al-Rawi. We are friends, but I'm just putting the facts out there as from what I've read over the weekend as having been a possibility, because the article went on to say that in the absence of the CBC whilst he was on vacation, his deputy was actually following the instructions of the Attorney General. So who knows? That happened during that time. Nobody knows. So
do you think Mr. Al-Rawi became a liability as Attorney General advising the cabinet, or was all the strategic on behalf of the Prime Minister to reorganize and reshape the possible effectiveness of the government in the context of a government having faced so many crises in the last 6 months or a year?
Well, Paul, nobody knows. This is what I'm saying. The Prime Minister owes an explanation, otherwise just be guessing. And I think the Prime Minister should come out and say, look, we have a significant legislative agenda that we need to accomplish over the next 3 years. I believe that Mr. Armour is best equipped to do such and such, and this is the reason why I've made the decisions that I have.
I want to quickly go back to that point you made, Mr. Bard, about the Attorney General may possibly have gone to the Parliament to change that legislation without the tacit approval of the Cabinet and Prime Minister, based on what's coming out from the Chief Parliamentary Council now, right? And because it makes sense, because in light of the fact that Dr. Rowley has publicly stated he had lost confidence in the then Commissioner of Police a year before. So it almost makes sense that because the former commissioner has always also been parroting that he didn't have a problem with Dr. Rowley because he himself had brought this legislation to Parliament that allowed Gary to continue in office. So it makes sense what you are hypothesizing.
Well, even if Faris Al-Rawi as AG did that legislation of his own volition, the Prime Minister would in fact have given it his tacit approval because it passed.
Thank you. I don't understand the mindset.
Let me say
the
this.
Attorney General can take legislation to Parliament and the Prime Minister sitting on right there and do agree with it. That is unthinkable.
Yeah.
Or he surprised the Prime Minister in the Parliament.
Well, now, you see, if what we read from the article over the weekend is correct, then it means that what the CPC is basically saying is that instead of the regular procedure or the accepted procedure, which is a note is drafted by a particular ministry, okay, whether it's national security, whether it's health, whatever ministry it is, it then comes to Cabinet. The note is approved by Cabinet. The legislation then goes to be drafted by the CPC's office. And only then does it come back out through that route, through the Attorney General's office, and then goes to the Parliament. If it is that the CPC is suggesting or stating that he has been instructed by the Attorney General to bypass that procedure, which means that the Attorney General walks into his office in the CPC's office and says, I want you to draft legislation that I'm giving you here. And CPC says, where's the Cabinet note from the relevant ministry? He said, don't worry about that. Now, that, for example, could be how that piece of legislation ended up in the Parliament without the oversight.
But what are the implications for a deviation from that process? Because I don't know what is it law, is it convention? What are the implications of deviation from the established process?
Right, so it's convention, and this is why the CPC said he wrote to the Law Reform Commission for guidance on the judicial proceedings, to get judicial proceedings on guidance as to how he should act, because this has been, from what he says, a practice, that would be the route. So that would then prevent any Attorney General, and it makes sense, right? They would prevent any Attorney General from just walking in to the CPC's office and say, hey, now I want you to draft this piece of legislation for me. And then it ends up in the Parliament without the scrutiny of the Cabinet. And so a Minister of Health or Minister of Sports or any minister could suddenly find that a piece of a bill is being presented in Parliament without any input from his or her ministry because it hasn't gone to the Cabinet.
Do you think that's dangerous?
Well, absolutely, because it may mean that a government could be undermined for the benefit of one person, because it may not be policy. It may be the individual's policy, but it may not be government policy. So when it lands up in the Parliament, his colleagues are not likely to vote against it, or not likely, they feel to have to support it. So I don't know, maybe that is what happened. I can't
Including
say.
The Prime Minister?
Including the Prime Minister.
But it shouldn't just end up in Parliament without going through Cabinet.
But that's what the debate is about now, Richard.
Yeah, but I mean, no, I understand Cabinet saying this is the policy, we want legislation drafted in X. But I can't see it getting on, I can't see legislation that the Cabinet is unaware of just suddenly coming onto the Parliament.
But these are the allegations. But these are the allegations that the CPC is making. In fact, the article went further to say that Jackie Sampson, who I think we all know and have a great deal of respect for, Clerk of the House and has been Clerk of the House for several decades, actually returned the piece legislation to the CPC's office for this very same reason, saying that it had not gone through the proper process and the proper route to arrive at her desk to be laid. The clerk of the court, a clerk of the house, had difficulty with that process.
Yeah, I remember that part in the article. So you're right. So and she became a check.
Yeah, and there's very little you'll get past Mrs. Sampson Miller.
Absolutely.
Well, can we change the conversation?
And again, we are all hypothesizing. We spend a lot.
In the absence of Prime Minister's statement on it, Mr. Gary, in our interview with him last Thursday, indicated he's forming a political party, and he's working toward launching before local government election, because we asked him specifically, are you involved? Have you been asked to be involved?
You asked him if I was involved.
If you are involved, or if you've been asked to be involved?
Neither of the above.
If you're asked, will you?
Will you consider it? Let's make it easier.
That's sorry, like a yes or no, Vasant. I know you're
No. Look, I think that many things are broken in this country. Many of the institutions that we hold there that should be providing the level of service and goods to the population, a lot of it is broken. And I think the rest of the world is moving. Many parts of the world are moving ahead and leaving us behind. And as we say in Trinidad, we still jamming still. We need a group of very serious, committed people who have achieved things in life outside of politics, who has a level of credibility to come together, in my belief, that crosses party lines, crosses racial lines, and really truly are prepared to roll their sleeves up for a minimum of 5 years to restore the institutions to Trinidad, the necessary institutions to Trinidad and Tobago, and also to change our culture. We have our culture. There's been in my opinion, a decaying that has taken place over the years that has created the kind of society that I don't think that we can be very proud of. Yes, we will laugh and we'll joke about certain things, and God is a Trini and we love living here and so on. But the reality is a lot of young people see no opportunities in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of them do not want to live here. And for all the reasons we all know, whether it's crime, whether it's healthcare, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's opportunities. So you need a group of people who truly understand those issues and will roll their sleeves up and actually get down to making those things, making the job happen. And there are Trinidadians there, here and abroad, who are prepared to do that. If a group of people like that come together, I would like to be a part of that, yes.
Do you think Mr. Griffith can be that nexus? He leverages what he says is his popularity, and I'm putting it in parentheses. But in the present political construct, and you spoke about the construct of the PNM and the UNC being the primary parties in Trinidad and Tobago, do you think, given what's happening in Tobago, and Tobago is a different socio-political environment, that a third party has a chance in the next local and or national election in this country, if, I guess, constructed right and marketed properly?
I think there is so much disenfranchisement, there's so much disempowerment, so much disconnection. I think the gap between those who are wealthy and those who are poor is increasing significantly on a daily basis. I think the general population are sick and tired of the kinds of politics that we are playing in the country, and we're playing with their lives. You're going to get the hardcore on both sides. I think if you were to look at the majority of the people in this country, they're really looking for something that is an option that will improve the quality of their lives. And so I think the answer to your question, Paul, is a properly harnessed and mobilized group of people will capture the imagination. And I think the population has become a little bit more mature.
But you said the majority of people. There are average 300,000 who have voted for the PNM and UNC likewise. And the country is supposed to be 1.4 million if you take out the under 18 who can't vote or those who are in
It's about 1.1 million, I think.
Eligible voters.
Eligible voters.
And then you will have the 200,000 who will never vote, no matter what you offer them. So what you're saying is that you really have to get some of those PNM and UNC people to say, you know what, this is a viable option, and motivate those who were not voting before for either of those two major parties to come out and vote to make a difference. We all know, and I'm being frank here, it's unlikely to get to that point. So is it that a party has to grow and get 2-3 seats and be a negotiating leverage in the parliament and then grow from that? Or do you think there can be a clean sweep and we see a party being formidable and get 14, 18 seats off the bat after just 3 or 4 years of campaigning or forming themselves?
But it happened
when
twice
I talk
before.
to people, Paul, pardon?
I said it happened twice before. The shift was drastic away from the PNM that caused the PNM to lose in 86 and again in 2010.
Yeah, but to be fair, that was with essentially a coalition with the UNC or the ULF in both cases. But I think that the UNC has lost political relevance in Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, there are still going to be people who will hold on to the organization simply for historical reasons. But I think Paul is right. You need to get from both parties sufficient numbers to form a critical mass with those who are generally sitting on the fence. So, PNM, UNC, and those sitting on the fence, I think can make a significant impact. I don't know if there's going to be enough enough time by the time the local government elections come around. But I certainly think by the time the general is called, if it's called, if it's not an early election, but called when it's due, I think it comes down, gentlemen, to assembling the right group of people that is not cosmetic in nature. So you're not putting an Indian or African just for the sake of how it will look. You're actually bringing to the table people of genuine competence and credibility who can capture the imagination of the people. And
I also think it will require a really serious falling off of support for Dr. Keith Rowley himself as an individual, as did happen in the past with Patrick Manning. I think,
agree. Yeah. And I think, if you ask me, I think Dr. Rowley means well, but one of the biggest problems that the PNM has, in my humble opinion, is the position of Minister of Finance. And I've said that from day one. And also Dr. Rowley's demeanor and the way he manages situations and the way he comes across is not endearing. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that you have to be endearing in everything that you do, but I think you need to show a level of empathy, particularly when people are going through difficult times in their own lives, and people are going through that. And there's a level of arrogance that has crept in that, in my opinion, creates a scenario that happened with Prime Minister Manning in the later stages of his tenure.
But it's interesting you said that Richard asked this question last week of Mr. Griffith. They have similar personalities in many ways.
No, and I'm not disagreeing with you.
Mr. Griffith is not somebody to take criticism. He's lashed out. Part of the reason that Dr. Rowley has on record is losing confidence is Mr. Griffith's engagement with the general public or anyone who seeks to add critique to his performance in any way. So I don't see someone who's entrenched and has built a base with his party being replaced by someone who is new, who is known to be petulant at time. Where's the base going to come from?
Which is why Vasant has to lead the organization. It's clear that Vasant is the only person who could bridge that gap and be that person that everybody will look up to, because
I think the biggest problem, I think one of the main problems, Vasant, would be the issue of that third party group of voters who sit on the fence and being able to energize and convince them that a new party is going to make a difference. They've been bitten once with the NAR. They've been bitten twice with the People's Partnership. So for a lot of the people in that group, they feel disillusioned, I want to postulate, that third parties, which generally, so far, have included some sort of configuration of the entrenched parties coming into it, somehow does not fulfill that third party group's vision for where Trinidad and Tobago needs to go. And so they might be a cynical bunch at this point. So it's a Herculean task to actually get them motivated to say, well, this third party may be the one. The third shot may be actually be the winning shot. And whichever third party that surfaces has to overcome that. And I put that against the backdrop that a lot of young people who are 18 and probably under 30 are less committed to the UNC or the PNM with the same maniacal fervor of generations past. They're not entrenched in no party because they're more of an information age. Their generation, their Generation Z, they're millennials. They tend to be a little bit more independent than their parents would have been. So they are potential, but you still have to somehow be able to engage them and get them on board.
Get them away from the maniacal fervor. I love those words, Richard.
And I agree with everything there because, Richard, in fact, many of my friends, or the majority of my friends, fall into that category of those who are very disappointed with what happened with the two experiments, and I call them experiments, in 86 and in 2010. And it's very difficult to bring them back to the table because of their levels of disappointment. I do feel, however, as time goes by and many of them actually become more frightened and more insecure about the future, their own future, the future of their businesses, the fact that they've got to send their children abroad to live. All of those things are going to start playing on their minds and hopefully get them to overcome the disappointments of the last two occasions. I don't think they've reached there yet, but I truly believe that a group of people that they see as credible and as competent, and not just more of the same, and not just a uniting of forces to just win a general election, which is what has happened in the past, and in my opinion, why those two experiments failed. I think that is where the tipping point will come.
But isn't that what Richard said holding true then? Because at that stage, we can't separate ourselves from our past and the disillusionment with those experiments as it has been, as we put it. So people have tried that before and found that it's one thing. And this country votes out because of disaffection and frustration with any particular leader / government more than it's inspired by something new or different.
I do believe that in this instance, they need to be inspired by something different, not just vote whoever is there out for whoever wishes to come into play. And you made the point about Gary. The reality is that popular, and you also mentioned the fact that he's very popular, but popularity is not what this. It really is about competence and credibility, and that is what I think the population. I think the population has been. They're hurting. They've been burnt on many occasions. And I think they're willing truly to put aside this kind of politics that we have practiced for so many years that has not served them.
Are we ready though? Are we really?
I
mean, it sounds, I get it, I feel it sometimes, but then I look around and I say, past us getting a nice salary and taking care of our children, do we really want change in Trinidad and Tobago? I ask myself that question honestly. If we really want to change, where are we going and how we getting there?
Well, when enough people are touched by negativity and when enough people are suffering as a result of mismanagement or corruption or our leaders' inability to improve our lives, I think that's going to happen. And I think we're getting there, Paul. I don't think we may be there yet, but I think we are getting there. But I think genuinely, people are not going to be excited to come out and vote with what exists currently on either side.
Changing ministers is one thing. What do you think Dr. Roddy really needs to change in terms of his government's operation? Because changing ministers under the same framework and approach is like, to me, same thing.
I think he needs to have a visionary minister of finance. I think he needs to do something extraordinary with agriculture. I think that if you were to look, I've said this, and this is not a personal attack on Minister Im, but he just doesn't have the capacity or the vision to lead in the same way that the Jamaican Minister of Finance is doing and what's required in the country. This is not a bookkeeping exercise anymore. This is a vision for a country that engenders a level of confidence that will get people back to work, that will create job opportunities, that will create foreign direct investment, that will create local investment. All of you guys know, and you in particular, Paul, because you're in the Senate, you know, and you've discussed this before, there's $12 billion tied up in our banks in excess liquidity. Why? It is simple. You think people just want to leave their money there and not have a return on it? Of course not. But they don't have the level of confidence. Nobody is going to the private sector and say, listen, guys, the private sector is the engine of growth in any country. They provide the employment, they provide investment. Tell us what you guys need to be able to take that $12 billion or a large part of it out of the banks and invest it in Trinidad and Tobago. Why do you think last year Trinidad and Tobago suffered from a negative $489 million of capital? Negative. You know what that means? That means there's capital flight. That Trinidad and Tobago received less foreign direct investment than Haiti last year. Why is that? It is because there is a lack of confidence.
But then when you say that, and it's a fact because it's accurate, and then it's so easy for the authorities to come and say, well, everywhere in the world suffered that at different levels. This is a pandemic, and we all buy it and walk away from the
We've been saying that, Paul, for 7 years.
But, I was going to say a different version of what Paul just said, because there are many people who are crediting Minister Imbert with keeping the country on an even keel, despite all the economic hardships out there. And through 2+ years of a pandemic, there are people who have an opposing view that he is doing a fantastic job.
All he is doing is borrowing enough money to prop up the country, but creating a debt burden for our young people in the future. Our debt burden is up to 90% of our GDP. Now, I don't have a problem with creating debt. But how are you going to repay it? You must be in a position, it's like a householder, right? You're borrowing money from the bank, how are you going to repay it?
But more than that, and added to that, is borrowing money to pay bills is one thing. Borrowing money to invest in productive enterprises that's going to bear fruit down the road is something completely different.
That is my point, and that is exactly the point I'm making. And it has to be a balance of both. There are going to be immediate needs, for example, when the pandemic hit, that you required cash that you didn't expect to have spent prior to the pandemic. We all understand that. We agree that every country in the world has gone through that. But what are you doing on the other side to create economic activity side by side, which is what the Roadmap Committee was set up to do. The Roadmap Committee was set up to look at, yes, we're in a pandemic, yes, lives are important, but on the other side of the pandemic, are we creating an economic pandemic? And that's where we are today. Where are the new jobs coming from? What's the new world of work going to look like? How is our education system catering for this new world of work and preparing our children for these new jobs that we are creating? All of these are things that that the Minister of Finance, in my humble opinion, needs to have a group of people around him who are thinking through these things. And the reason I say the Minister of Finance, it is because he holds the purse strings, and he needs to understand where the investments that he is making with taxpayers' money and money that he's borrowing, where those investments are going to go. And when I say investment, I'm not talking about economic investments. I'm talking about investments in education, in healthcare.
But what you're saying, several people, independent thinkers, respected people have said, Dr. Trevor Farrell and other economists, and all that comes out is all these armchair financial experts, and it's dismissed, and the default goes back to the conversation of who we are aligned to is who you believe, and the critical thinking that is being, or the information or the ideas or the critique, and I'm not saying criticism, critique from the experts who were part of the solution group at the start, get frustrated and leave, and it's easy to dismiss them, and the public believes who they want to believe, and we don't get a change or a shift to what independent, credible people seem to be saying. It's easy to say, well, all these armchair financial experts were wrong because, look, we've shown growth, and the IMF did not say this, and because someone has the ability to convince with one news headline on the front page of a paper.
Well, and you're quite correct, and that's because of the gullibility of our citizens and their willingness to just be partisan in what is being told to them and what they believe. Because as you'd appreciate, and we come back down to our tribal politics, whatever Minister Imbert says, there will be a group of people, regardless of whether it's factual or not, will believe it. And what Mrs. Bissessa says on the next side, or Dave Tanku says as ill-equipped as who is to be minister, a shadow minister, whatever he says will also be believed by a group of people, and they will parrot it in similar fashion, right? So that's the issue. But I think most people who are listening to what I am saying will know that I'm not an armchair financial person. I have done, succeeded in both the private sector and in the public sector. But you're right. Minister Imbert has to just get up tomorrow morning and say, Vasant Bharath talking nonsense. And there's a group of people who say, yeah, you're talking nonsense, right? But that is what needs to change. That is everybody in the poll. It won't change. Not everybody is going to change overnight. But I think culturally, we need to change. And our leaders, leaders in, I saw something Dr. Farrell wrote yesterday. I'm not sure which news it was. CIC, nil, QRC. And he said this is not the intercall score, but it related to the scholarships. Yeah. And then he talked about the decline in the performance of both CIC and QRC over the years, and how they've been overtaken by other schools. And he said it all came down to leadership. Well, the reality is that everything in life comes down to proper leadership.
Well, did you see the response from leadership of QRC? We don't measure ourselves by academic performance alone.
There we are. So
you can spin anything anyhow.
Our reality is that just a minute. Our reality is that in developing countries, in third world countries, I won't call us a third world country, but a developing country like ours, leadership is even more critical because leaders have greater impact on our daily lives because our institutions don't function effectively. So we're not insulated as citizens by the institutions that are meant to serve us, because tomorrow morning, Dr. Rowley, if Mrs. Bissessa was perhaps would walk into a cabinet meeting and say, right, we're doing this. No institution is involved. The cabinet then formulates the policy and sends it to the institution to develop, right? So we are more susceptible in developing countries to the actions of our leaders. And it could look at what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, right? One man, right? A leader in a country like that is determining the fate of millions of his own people who have no say in what's going on. And it's even as more critical in small countries like ours.
I'm just wondering, I know you kind of touched on it when we started, the issue of where is Trinidad and Tobago at? And I think as citizens across Trinidad and Tobago need to ask themselves, do we feel optimistic? Do we feel that the country is being innovative and transformative in terms of improving our quality of life? Because it always boils down, they say all politics gets local. It comes down to your quality of life and how you feel your quality of life is. Has it changed for the better? Has it changed for the worse? and what is your investment in the future? And you get a sense when you look around the Caribbean that you're seeing Jamaica moving in a particular direction. You see Barbados moving in a particular direction, and you see Guyana moving in a particular direction. Of course, Guyana, of course, a lot of it is fueled by the natural resources that they have, the bounty that they've received, that they've discovered. And you feel that there's a particular, I don't know if it's, you just feel that there's a particular energy that is emanating from Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana that Trinidad is not part of. I don't know if it's a misconception of my part, but I just feel that those three countries are energized in some way that is transformative, and that Trinidad is at risk of being left behind. Am I misreading it?
In my opinion, Richard, you're absolutely correct. You've hit the nail on the head. I happen to be, I was actually at the oil and gas conference in Guyana a couple of weeks ago, and I've been talking to government about their ease of doing business, because they are finding themselves in a situation where over the years, levels of bureaucracy have built up, and they need to ensure that they recognize all of the investment opportunities coming to Guyana as is possible. But what I was annoyed about was the fact that there was no representation from the government of Trinidad and Tobago at the oil and gas conference. And whether there was some issue as to whether they were formally invited, I don't know. I've seen on social media copies of invitations sent to Dr. Rowley. It may not have come directly from the president, but there was one I saw that came from the president of the chamber. Regardless of that, to me, I think leaders sometimes need to put aside pride, and they need to do what's best for their citizens and their country. And I felt that Trinidad and Tobago should have had, whether they were invited or not, they should have had a high-level delegation. If not the Prime Minister, certainly the Minister of Energy, high officials from the energy sector should have been present in Guyana to do two things. One, to show that we continue to be leaders in the world of energy, or we would like to continue in that route. Even though we may no longer have a refinery, we do have expertise that we can sell to the world, number one. And secondly, that we have citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who are looking for work since we've closed down our refinery and since our energy sector has declined. And so therefore, creating a bridge to allow that relationship to flourish between the Guyanese government and Trinidad and Tobago citizens. To me, it was incumbent on our leadership to create that bridge. And you're seeing it with Barbados and Guyana, as you just said. You're seeing it with Jamaica and Guyana. I see that this weekend, the Guyanese government has taken a decision whereby, well, not the Guyanese government, but CARICOM. There's a decision taken where previously for CARICOM to move ahead on any decision, it required a 2/3 majority of all the member states. Now they're looking at once 3 members agree on a certain course of action, they can do that. And that's actually to engender that continued relationship between Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana. And so now they're embarking on a very large scale project for agriculture that will benefit Jamaica, Barbados, and Guyana to be, I think it's going to take place in Guyana. But again, Trinidad has been left out. Why? Why is it that we're not part of those discussions? And even if we may not have been invited, we have to find a way to force ourselves into those relationships so that, our country can benefit. But, we're not doing the right. We are falling behind, not just behind our CARICOM neighbors, but we're falling behind the rest of the world.
All right. Well, I guess we could, I know it's after 8, it's 8:15 already, actually. So Vasant, Bharath, until we see and hear from you again, what is the name of the new party that's coming out, by the way?
I'm just drinking my blue waters and minding the business.
That's the appropriate answer,
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, So You have an attorney general and a minister of education right there sitting in front of you. Eh? A possible attorney general and a possible minister of education.
You know what's sad? People who are moderately thinking, who can see merit on both sides, are often dismissed in this country because you're not hardcore loyalist, and that is sad in this country.
Yeah.
You have to only see evil on the other side to survive.
And that's exactly it. And because we're still practicing 1960s politics.
Yeah, and that's sad.
In the UNC, we're still talking about Mausi and Nana and Nani when we should be talking about our grandchildren. What's the legacy we're leaving? You know what they're going to say about you again. I know that.
Put your knife on fork.
Put on your knife on fork.
Put your knife on fork.
I'll pick up my spoon.
But I can tell everybody that my nanny is an African woman who was living in Laventille, and my nana is an Indian from Shogunas, and they lived in Laventille for 56 years. Yeah. And I spent all of my young childhood there. So they can say whatever.
But they didn't feed you. They didn't feed you on Sahari leaves.
That's the problem. Too much fine China. Thank you, Vasant. Have a great day. Be safe.
All right, guys.
Thanks so much. All the best.
Take care. Have a great day. Thanks again.
All right. Take care. All right. Of course, that was
Vasant
Bharath. All right. Let's get into a news brief, all powered by Champion Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
Former UNC Minister Vasant Bharath says he's not involved in the political movement being formed by former parliamentary colleague Gary Griffith. Griffith, a former National Security Minister and Police Commissioner, told Power 102 Digital last